My beloved child, stop scrolling. Pause here for a moment, because something is waiting for you inside these words, and before you dismiss this as another message meant for someone else, I want you to understand why your eyes stopped here. What you are about to hear may touch a place inside you that you have kept hidden even from yourself. There is a truth about your soulmate that you were never supposed to discover through ordinary conversation. They tested you, quietly, secretly, without telling you what they were doing, and when they finally discovered the truth about your heart, something inside them collapsed. They broke down in tears, not because you failed them, because you passed a test they never told you existed. My beloved child, listen carefully, because this is not a story about manipulation, games, or proving your worth to another person. This is about a wounded heart that was terrified of being deceived again. Your soulmate had a question they were too afraid to ask you directly. They wanted to know whether your love was real when there was nothing to gain from it. They wanted to know whether you would remain honest when nobody was watching. They wanted to know whether the person you showed them was truly who you were, or simply the version of yourself you wanted them to believe. And instead of asking, they watched, they listened, they noticed, they remembered, they quietly collected moments that you thought meant nothing. A sentence you said casually, the way you responded when someone else was mentioned, the way you handled an opportunity to hide something, the way you behaved when you believed there would be no consequences. They were paying attention, and you had no idea. There were moments when you probably thought they were distant. Maybe you thought they were confused. Maybe you believed they were losing interest. Maybe you wondered why they suddenly became quieter after being warm with you. But there was something happening beneath that silence. They were observing your heart, and the strange thing is, you never knew you were being tested. You simply continued being yourself. That is what changed everything. Because a performance can survive for a few days, a false personality can survive for a few conversations, but eventually, truth reveals itself in the smallest moments, and your soulmate saw something they were not prepared to see. They saw consistency. They saw honesty. They saw restraint. They saw that you did not become a different person simply because you thought nobody was looking, and that realization frightened them. Because they had been preparing themselves for disappointment, they had almost convinced themselves that everyone eventually lies, everyone eventually leaves, everyone eventually chooses convenience over loyalty. Everyone eventually reveals another face. They had built walls around their heart because somewhere in their past, trusting someone had cost them deeply, and when they met you, they wanted to believe you were different, but wanting to believe something and trusting it are two completely different things, so they created a secret test, not one dramatic test, not something obvious. It was made of tiny moments, small opportunities for you to reveal who you really were. And perhaps the most important thing about this is that you never performed for them. You did not know you had anything to prove. You simply acted according to your character. That is why the results shook them so deeply. My beloved child, there was a moment when your soulmate expected you to choose the easier path. They thought you would hide something. They thought you would say what sounded good. They thought you might protect yourself at the expense of honesty. They had prepared their heart for that possibility. They had even told themselves, if this happens, I will walk away before I become attached. They had already written the ending in their mind. They believed they were protecting themselves. But then you did something unexpected. You told the truth. Maybe it was about something small. Maybe you admitted something that would have been easier to conceal. Maybe you refused to participate in something that could have benefited you. Maybe you defended someone who was not even there to defend themselves. Maybe you simply remained loyal to a principle when nobody would have known if you had abandoned it. Whatever the moment was, it looked ordinary to you. To them, it was enormous, because they had been watching for the smallest crack, and instead, they found integrity. They found the thing they were secretly praying existed, and suddenly, all the defenses they had built began to shake. You see, my beloved child, sometimes the most powerful proof of love is not what someone says when they are being watched. It is what they choose when they believe no one will ever know. Your soulmate discovered that about you, and that discovery forced them to confront something painful. They had been unfair to you. They had been suspicious of you because someone else had hurt them. They had been measuring your character against wounds you did not create. They had been asking you to prove that you were not the person who broke them, and you never even knew that was the assignment. There is something deeply emotional about realizing you have been judging someone through the shadow of another person. Your soulmate experienced that realization, and it broke them. They went somewhere private. They sat alone, and for the first time, they allowed themselves to admit what they had been refusing to say. You are not like the others. Those words were difficult for them. Because if you were different, then they had to decide whether they were brave enough to love differently too, and that was the real battle. Not whether you were trustworthy, whether they were brave enough to trust you. Do you understand the difference? They had been looking for evidence that you would hurt them, but what they discovered was evidence that their fear had been lying to them. And when fear loses its argument, tears often come. They cried because they remembered every time they doubted you, every time they pulled away, every time they questioned your intentions, every time they made you feel as though you had to prove your sincerity. They remembered the moments when you probably wondered what you had done wrong. And they realized something painful. You had not changed. Their perception had. You had remained steady while they were fighting a war inside themselves. My beloved child, there is a reason this message is reaching you now. You may have recently wondered why someone suddenly became distant, why their energy changed, why their communication became strange, why someone who seemed emotionally connected suddenly became cautious. You may have thought the connection was disappearing, but what if they were not walking? What if they were trying to understand whether their heart was safe with you? And what if the answer they found was so powerful that they could no longer pretend they felt nothing? That is what happened. They discovered something they had not expected. You were honest even when dishonesty would have been easier. You did not need applause for doing the right thing. You did not need someone to reward you. You simply did what your conscience told you to do, and that revealed more about your soul than any romantic confession could have revealed. Because words can be rehearsed, character cannot, and your character spoke when you thought nobody was listening. That is why the tears came. Not immediately. At first, they tried to remain composed. They told themselves it was nothing. They tried to explain your behavior logically. They said perhaps you were simply having a good day. Perhaps the situation was different. Perhaps you had another reason. But the evidence kept accumulating. One moment, then another, until they could no longer explain it away. And eventually, they realized something terrifying. They were beginning to trust you, real trust, the kind that makes a person vulnerable, the kind that makes the heart say, maybe I can finally stop protecting myself. And that sentence can be frightening when someone has spent years building emotional walls. Your soulmate had become very good at leaving before being left. They had learned how to detach before they became too attached. They had learned how to pretend they did not care. They had learned how to make silence look like strength. But you disrupted that pattern, not by chasing them, not by demanding their attention, not by trying to convince them. You disrupted it simply by being genuine. And genuine people are dangerous to emotional defenses, because they make pretending unnecessary. My beloved child, there was another part of the test you may never have noticed. Your soulmate wanted to know what you would do when they gave you an opportunity to betray something private. They may have shared information with you. They may have mentioned something about their past. They may have revealed a vulnerability and then waited. They wanted to know whether their secret would remain safe. And when it did, something changed. They had expected curiosity. They expected questions. They expected the information to travel. But you protected it. You did not use their vulnerability as entertainment. You did not turn their pain into gossip. You did not weaponize what they trusted you with. That mattered more than you realize. Because for someone who has been betrayed, confidentiality is not a small thing. It is sacred. When you protected their secret, you unknowingly told their heart, "You are safe with me." And that sentence reached deeper than any romantic promise. They may never have told you how much it affected them, but they felt it, they carried it, they replayed it, and then they began asking another question. What if this is the person I have been waiting for? That question terrified them, because now they could no longer dismiss the connection. Before, they could tell themselves it was attraction. They could call it chemistry. They could blame timing. They could say they were simply lonely. But honesty changed the equation. Because trust is different. Trust means the heart has begun to open. And once the heart opens, fear becomes louder. That is why they may have pulled back after getting closer. Do not assume every withdrawal means rejection. Sometimes people retreat because they feel something too powerful to control. Sometimes the heart runs away precisely because it wants to stay. Your soulmate was caught in that contradiction. They wanted you. They feared wanting you. They trusted you. They feared trusting you. They missed you. They feared admitting they missed you. And all the while, you may have been wondering what was happening. You may have blamed yourself. You may have asked whether you were too much, whether you said the wrong thing, whether you should have acted differently. But my beloved child, you were not the problem. Their fear was not created by you. Their wounds were not created by you. And you were never meant to spend your life proving that you were worthy of being trusted. You simply revealed who you were. they had to decide what to do with the truth. And eventually, they did. They cried. They broke down. And in that private moment, they admitted something they had never wanted to admit. I judged them because I was afraid. That confession changed the way they saw everything. They began remembering the moments when you were patient, the moments when you gave them space, the moments when you could have demanded answers but chose compassion. The moments when you could have embarrassed them but protected them, the moments when you could have taken advantage of their feelings but chose restraint. Those moments became evidence, and evidence became trust, and trust became something they could no longer run from. But there is another reason those tears mattered. They were not only crying because of you. They were crying for the version of themselves that had forgotten how to trust. They were grieving the years spent expecting betrayal. They were grieving the relationships where they had given too much to the wrong people. They were grieving the times they had mistaken emotional chaos for love, and suddenly, standing in front of the possibility of something genuine, they realized they had almost pushed it away. That realization can break a heart open, because sometimes we are not afraid that someone will hurt us. Sometimes we are afraid that they will not, because if they do not hurt us, we can no longer blame our walls for keeping us safe. We have to decide whether to lower them, and your soulmate is standing at that threshold. One hand is still holding on to the past, the other is reaching toward you. They do not know exactly what happens next. But they know they cannot return to the person they were before discovering the truth about you. Something inside them has shifted permanently. They now know that you are not someone they can treat casually. They now know that your heart is not a game. They now know that if they come toward you, they must come honestly. And that is where their fear becomes even deeper. Because the secret test was never really about you. It was about whether they could finally believe that love did not have to hurt, and you gave them evidence that perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps love can be honest. Perhaps loyalty can be quiet. Perhaps someone can choose you without demanding something in return. Perhaps trust can be built without force. And perhaps they have finally found someone who makes them want to become better rather than simply feel better. That is why they have been thinking about you differently. Not merely romantically, spiritually, emotionally. They have begun asking themselves why your presence affected them so deeply, why your absence felt different from other absences, why your honesty made them cry, why your character mattered more than your appearance, why they felt seen around you, why they felt exposed around you, and why, even after trying to distance themselves, their heart kept returning. There is a reason. But before that reason can be fully revealed, there is one more piece of the secret test you need to understand. Because there was a final moment, a moment when your soulmate deliberately created a situation where you could have chosen the easier path. They were watching from a distance. They expected you to do one thing. You did the opposite. And when they saw it, they did not simply become emotional. They realized they had been wrong about you, completely wrong. They had prepared themselves to walk away. They had even made a private promise that if you failed that final test, they would never look back. They thought they were protecting their heart, but what they witnessed changed everything. They stood there in silence, their chest tightened, their eyes filled, And then the tears came, because in that instant, they realized something they had been afraid to admit from the beginning. They were no longer testing whether you were honest. They were testing whether they could finally allow themselves to love you, and you had just given them the answer. But what they did immediately after those tears, what they reached for, what they wrote, and the one sentence they almost sent you before stopping at the very last second, is something you still do not know, because that sentence contains the truth they have been hiding from you all along. And when you hear what it was, you will understand why their silence has never meant what you thought it meant.